Good morning, everyone. I'm certainly glad to see everybody here to show some love for Unified Messaging. My name is Lynn Rowe. I've been with the company for 18 years in various roles. For the last 6 or 7 years, I've been working with the Blink Skype for Business Unified Communications team. Prior to that, I spent a number of years working in the Exchange Group. Came into the UC strategy via Unified Messaging, so I have a special place for that in my heart. We've got a lot of things to talk about today. Reviewing the hybrid implementation of Unified Messaging. We'll also talk about online, but I'll take a quick poll here and just kind of get an idea of how many people actually still have Exchange on premise. A lot of people. Wow. Okay. Anybody have their? Can you just go ahead and show me your hands for those that are actually in maybe a hybrid scenario or thinking about migrating to the cloud? Very good. So today we're actually going to review some of the management tools that we have in Skype for Business for hybrid scenarios. The management tools, indeed, don't really help us with Unified Messaging. But they are there, and you need to know about them so you know how to leverage those in a hybrid solution when you might have some of your users in the cloud for Skype for Business, some of them on-prem, and of course in your hybrid Exchange solution as well. We're going to talk about some of the management options and strategies of how I've learned and how our customers have found the best way to deploy a hybrid solution for the unified communication piece, how to get your voicemail in the cloud. And we'll talk about some of the configuration and management tools. Troubleshooting scenarios, I'll actually go through some scenarios here and I'll do a little demo of some of the things that you can do to leverage or to manage a solution when you have some unified messaging in the cloud and some of it in your on-premise deployment. We'll also talk about some of the important integration pieces of the product beyond the voice aspects. It's not just voicemail with Skype for Business. There are several other considerations like PIM integration and archiving, some other components. So we'll talk first about our managing the Skype for Business voicemail solutions. So there are some new UI features. They're not for voicemail. So we give you the ability now in Skype for Business to move a user into the cloud via the control panel, the Skype for Business control panel. Nevertheless, this really doesn't help us for setting up voicemail policies, pointing users to the cloud for voicemail. We'll go over some of the configuration PowerShell scripts. So dial plans, they need to be, as a general rule, we want to manage your dial plans in two separate entities. You can't have a dial plan that's split between the cloud and between your on-premise. When you move a user or when you move a mailbox into the cloud, that user can no longer be enabled on a voicemail policy that's on your on-prem environment. So you have a little bit of a challenge in managing those dial plans. I'm going to go through a couple of a demo that kind of talks about how you manage perhaps 2 subscriber accesses or auto attendance so that you can dial between them. We'll talk about the SIP type dial plans and how they communicate via Skype for Business Federation. So those of you who've got your voicemail in the cloud, do you have any users that are also in the cloud? Link or Skype for Business users in the cloud? Show of hands, please. Okay. So for those of you that are taking your users into the cloud for Skype for Business, you probably already discovered that you can't have voicemail for those users enabled. So that is a limitation. At some point in time, hopefully, we'll have a voice solution that you can have voicemail in the cloud as well. We'll look at those. Anyways, configuration is automatic between on-prem and O365. It's not. So connecting for Skype for Business or to the Skype for Business online system, we've given you these tools here. So this is a screenshot basically from the link or the Skype for Business control panel. So this is new in the product here, so we give you an option here. It's basically going to go configure all of the things that you need to do that you used to have to do in PowerShell. Take the next step here, and this is the steps. We're actually going to log in with an account to your Skype for Business online. Can you guys see that okay? It's kind of a small screenshot, but it will configure all of the policies and all of the edge configuration that will allow you to federate. This is what it would look like if you were to just take the next step here. It would I've identified in this tool, has identified it has not been enabled for your edge server, and it's not configured for federation. One simple step, it's going to just go ahead and make those configuration steps for you. And if you go back and look in the Skype for Business control panel for your online deployment, you'll see that the federation has been there. It's been added. It's been turned on. These tools do allow you to easily move a user from the cloud and then from the cloud back right here from Link Control Panel. I no longer have to do that in PowerShell. So some of the basic configuration steps. You do need to get your mailboxes in the cloud and to get Skype for Business to communicate with the cloud and utilize these tools. You are going to need the Azure AD Connection Tool, or DirSync. It used to be called DirSync Tool. So this tool, of course, is what allows you to replicate all of the user properties up into the cloud, so they see if a user has been voicemail enabled or not, or all of the AD properties that are necessary for a cloud user. And it'll also allow cloud users to communicate back to on-prem users. You do need to configure new dial plans in O365. This is a necessity because you can't replicate with AD. Your dial plans can't be replicated to the cloud. You can have dial plans in the cloud with the same name, policies with the same name, but they have to be managed independently. So an example of this might be a consideration you might have is, okay, if I've got a voicemail-enabled user that's on-prem, and I move that user in exchange, I move that user's mailbox to the cloud, you probably would want to go and disable unified messaging for that user prior to replicating him up to the cloud. Now, I have seen some workarounds where you have matching policy names in the cloud configured, and some modifications to the Azure AD Sync connection tool that replicate the dial plan name. So these are possibilities, but it's not the recommended solution. We'd rather have you disable unified messaging for those users, go ahead and move their mailbox to the cloud, and then re-enable them for UM once they've been once their mailbox has been synchronized. Okay, so you do want to go ahead and set up Skype for Business hybrid using the control panel. Okay, those are that tool will again easily let you move users, because you're probably going to have users that are in the cloud that need to access voicemail of users that are still on-prem. So that is possible. You just can't have those users that are as Skype for Business user in the cloud having voicemail, even if their mailbox resides on the on-prem mailbox server. And there are a lot of automation tools as well for setting up the Exchange hybrid using the Exchange control panel, albeit probably not as simplistic as what we have, because you actually have to get the mailboxes migrated up there. So getting your email to Office 365. Hosted voicemail. By the way, just to kind of give you a summary, this session is kind of a more, this is not a problematic review. I'm going to teach you guys that this is not that complicated. So if you have, if you're wanting to migrate and unified messaging happens to be one of those things that is a deployment blocker for you, email is the perfect application for cloud operations. Not so much for voice yet, but we're getting there. The configuration steps for setting up the hosted voicemail policy is really not complicated at all. And I'm going to make this kind of easy for you, and that's what I'm trying to drive at. It's not hard. Create a hosted voicemail policy. These are features, by the way, are things that we enable actually in Skype for Business. This is not something that we're doing in Exchange. I'm assuming in this scenario that you've already got your mailbox migrated into O365. Create a hosted voicemail policy. Now, essentially what we're doing is we're telling Skype for Business that this user, or we're telling the Skype for Business system that there is a voicemail policy that's cloud-based, as well as giving you the ability to have an on-prem unified messaging. So this is the PowerShell commandlet to actually create the voicemail policy. We'll simply point this to the exapumoutlook.com. This is the federated endpoint for edge-to-edge communication, because all voicemail operations that go into the cloud do traverse over an edge if you're talking about Skype for Business. Step back for a moment. If you do have traditional PBXs, this is where the differentiation occurs. We'll actually do that, but that's not the focus of this session. So I just want to make sure you understand that for Skype for Business, it's all federation. There's no need for any SBAs, no additional setup. If you've got an edge server deployed, you're ready to go. And of course, you have to have an online tenant. So here's what this would look like. I'm showing you here this one where I've actually created a voicemail policy here called Link Me Into Voicemail. Okay? And you can see I've named it Hosted Voicemail, and it's destination point. Now, this is simply a routing mechanism. That's all it is. It tells me whenever a user is determined to have voicemail, where do I send that call? If I'm an on-prem, an example of this, if I'm an on-prem customer and I evaluate a user, I have to find that user in the Active Directory, determine if there's a dial plan, and then try to find servers that are servicing that dial plan. I'm kind of going to go over that a little bit later, but that's where the differentiation occurs here. I associate that voicemail policy with the users using this Grant CS hosted voicemail policy. And I'll show you this in a demo here later. I'm actually going to enable that user for the hosted voicemail policy, or hosted voicemail, after I've granted the policy to them. This is what the command line would look like and what it does. It says, okay, this user now should, when a call comes in and you can't answer the call or the user's not there, I'm going to go ahead, instead of trying to send them to an on-prem unified messaging server, I'm going to go ahead and send that off to the cloud and let the server determine what to do with this user. Now, one of the differences, by the way, with the hosted voicemail policy is that we don't use the diversion header. This is just a straight up invite that goes to the cloud. I need to create RTC contacts. Now these are the links that if you look at voicemail, it's really a telephony concept. So a call comes in from the PSTN to the user. I'm going to associate a telephone number. So that's what they're calling into. They're calling in for subscriber access and also for auto attendance. I have to have this connection with the SIP ID to the telephone number. So these contacts are what connect those two pieces together. This is the PowerShell commandlet that we use to create the contacts. Now you can also use there's a tool for those of us who have set unified messaging up. There is a tool that will let you do this in a GUI, but I like PowerShell, so what can I say? And then this particular commandlet, you still need to grant the hosted voicemail policy to this special contact. And he has to know that this is not a local unified messaging, auto attendant, or subscriber access. And these are different numbers, by the way. So this is what it would look like. We'll see him enabled here. At this point here, I've granted this particular contact a hosted voicemail policy, and that therefore when the subscriber access, when you dial in, it knows not to send that to a local server. It knows to send it off to the cloud. Voicemail to Exchange on-prem. Let's go ahead and discuss that. So one of the things, and these concepts, by the way, apply to the on-prem solution as well as your cloud solution. You really want to manage your dial plans in the same administrative domain of the user. And what I mean by that is if you've got sites in Toronto, in Charlotte, in Redmond, ideally you kind of want to align those dial plans to the user's area codes, if you will. They probably have unique dialing considerations like what the telephony provider in that geographic region requires for your number patterns. So try to manage those users. If you've set up dial plans in Skype for Business that are associated with your particular regions, match those in your unified messaging dial plans. It makes it much easier to manage, more granular, instead of having just one big dial plan. Okay? Mailboxes contain all of the user customization. Now, what I'm going to drive home on this one is that just like in any other telephony voicemail solution, really the only impact you have if you're disabling the user for unified messaging and re-enable him in another unified messaging dial plan or policy is that they get a PIN reset. So the system actually sends them an email, tells them what their new PIN is when they do a PIN reset, or you can manually do this with PowerShell or whatever. But the point is that they're not going to lose stuff like their custom voicemail greetings. All of their personal auto attendant operations will they'll still be in the mailbox. All that stuff is stored. They don't lose their voicemails when you disable them for a unified message. You still have them. And to drive home the concept of a dial plan is still a telephony-centric concept. So I mentioned this earlier. It's all about telephone numbers. So think about your dial plans when you're configuring them. Think about the dial plans as a telephone number concept. Don't try to use it just as a SIP dial plan. Because you still have phone numbers, enterprise voice phone numbers. Deploying voicemail on-prem. Again, 4 easy steps. There's only 3 when you're doing hybrid. So essentially, we're going to create the SIP type dial plan in Exchange. In the SIP type dial plan, we'll, in unified messaging, once you've created the dial plan, you've hopefully you've gone and you've determined what the subscriber access number is, and you've associated the subscriber access. I'm going to walk through this, by the way, in the lab, so you'll see this. But there's a tool we have in Exchange that allows us to automatically configure the rest of the components once the gateway objects. So telling Exchange where to route calls to in the event that you have an outbound call scenario like play on phone. That's why these Exchange needs to know about the Skype for Business server environment. It needs to give them users, give the system, the Skype for Business system, the permissions to read the dial plan properties on the user accounts to determine what dial plan they're connected with. It also goes in and grants the Skype for Business groups, management groups, access to read the dial plan container objects in the configuration container. So it knows which servers to route calls to in the event of a call redirection. So the script reads all of the Exchange dial plans and matches them up with the Skype for Business front-end servers, essentially, is what this will do. Certificates. Certificates are a bit of a problem here. There's some strict rules that you must adhere to. This is a common configuration problem in unified messaging where we've assigned a wildcard certificate that's been used somewhere else in the system to either the call router or the service. It does not have the server's FQDN as the name. So the reason for this is it has to have the name, it has to be issued to the name of the actual server you're connecting to, is because that's how the Skype for Business system trusts the Exchange server in the case of a refer, or so if you've called into somebody, they have a personal auto attendant, when a call gets referred, Skype for Business isn't really sure about that. He knows it because of the server name. He knows that this is a dial plan I found based on the reading the AD that this script allowed me access to get to. So he says, okay, that FQDN is something in the system. I'll go ahead and allow an outbound call to function. So there's also a thing about the subscriber access. So internally, your users can connect directly to unified messaging without this special contact. However, without that, without creating the contact, you've lost the ability to match that telephone number for people that are calling in to check their voicemails without voice access. And or if they happen to have you have one or more auto attendants configured in your Exchange system, your voicemail system, to dial other people or play special greetings, route them to certain places. So you need these contact objects, so go ahead and create them, even if you just want to have voicemail redirection working. So you don't need the contact to have voicemail redirection. You call somebody, if they're voicemail enabled, it'll work without this. But then they won't be able to do other functions. So please make sure you go ahead and create those objects. And we can look at that tool online as well. So the next thing we're going to look at is the dial plan. This is the screen that we have when you're creating a new dial plan in unified messaging. I'm simply going to name the dial plan, and I'm going to show you this exact dial plan I've already configured in my lab. I've configured a type dial plan of SIP URI. This must be a SIP URI type dial plan for Skype for Business or link integration with unified messaging. The same holds true, by the way, for creating dial plans in Office 365. You must specify the SIP type dial plan versus a telephony type dial plan. They're two different beasts altogether. The second thing is the security. It must be a secure type dial plan because everything is MTLS in Skype for Business. Now there is another option here that you might select. It's optional. The security can be optional. This will actually function in some cases, but all types of devices won't be able to communicate with the unified messaging server. So please make sure you choose secure type dial plans when you're configuring SIP type dial plans. Pick the language, the country code. The next step is we have to, this is an absolute necessity. Remember we talked about the contacts for the subscriber access. So if you're creating these contacts in Skype for Business, you've got that telephone number comes in, it matches up to the contact. There's also a SIP ID associated with that. However, there's no match to the telephone number in the dial plan. Remember we talked earlier about the concept of this is all telephony based. Well, Exchange is unified messaging. He's not really going to know how to process a SIP ID or SIP URI. He has to have a telephone number associated with that. So you have to go and configure the dial plan to associate the phone number that you've put on the RTC special contact into the dial plan so it knows which dial plan to connect to, because you possibly will have multiples. This is what the screen would look like. This is kind of a tricky one. This is a common call, by the way, where somebody has put this phone number in there and they've never hit the plus button. So just something that will work with the UI. Make sure you put this in E164 format. The little plus, the phone number as it would be dialed. It must match the same format as what you have in the RTC contact that you've created for the subscriber access or the auto attendant. Here's what the command line does here. So what processes actually take place when you run this script. You can see here we're configuring the appropriate administrative servers, those Skype for Business servers. They've been discovered via this script. Now, there's another concept here. You have to understand this tool will not function properly if the user executing the script does not have permission to read the Skype for Business side. So you'll have to have a user that's got permissions in both Exchange and in Skype for Business to set this up. It's a necessity. At the end, you'll see that they've gone and configured these particular properties for the particular dial plans that I've got configured on this system. I've just added this Skype for Business Redmond, so that's the one we've added to the permissions list. And we also see that we've created these UMIP gateways. Now, the UMIP gateways are the endpoints that unified messaging used in an outbound calling scenario. So they're, like we talked about the UM piece, there's always these features and modalities, if you will, that require the unified messaging system to be calling into Skype for Business instead of going the other way. And that would be play on phone, where somebody goes into Outlook and they select this operation to play my voicemail messages on my cell phone, perhaps. That's an outbound call. So that's what these gateway objects do. So a SIP invite would actually be leaving the UM server and going to the Skype for Business server. So Skype for Business during voicemail during Exchange hybrid call flows. When a call comes into unified messaging, when a call comes into Skype for Business for a user, I'm going to use in a couple of examples here. I'm going to show you a couple of users. One's me, Lynn Rowe, and another is Amy Alberts. So if Lynn Rowe is calling in, or anybody from the PSTN happens to be calling in to this Amy Alberts user, the Skype for Business system, if the user doesn't answer in time, evaluates for voicemail possibilities. If no possibility exists, if I don't have any dial plans, it's just going to get fast busy. You're not going to get anything. It's like a 404. So if I don't find a hosted voicemail policy associated with the user, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and read the dial plan properties from the user in the Active Directory. This is a simple schema property that's been added to the user object in Active Directory that says, I belong to dial plan X. Then it looks for, in the configuration container of your Active Directory, a matching dial plan, and therefore what servers are associated with that dial plan. So I need to know, the Skype for Business server needs to know where to send this invite to with the diversion header of the user. He'll send it to the subscriber access that you've created with that OCS util with the diversion header of the user's actual extension. That way it knows which mailbox to link it to. So the diversion header is really important to understand, by the way. If you that diversion header does not exist in the case of a hybrid solution. It's a different operation altogether. We have this whole infrastructure in the cloud that knows based on the phone number that you're dialing, which should be unique for everyone. So you have just a straight up invite going into the cloud operator or cloud endpoint through Federation. If there is a hosted voicemail policy found on the user account in Skype for Business, and that user is enabled for hosted voicemail, that's what he does. He just says, okay, what's the endpoint associated with that particular policy? Remember, we put the FQDN at exap.um.outlook.com on the hosted voicemail. So when he sees that this user is indeed enabled for hosted voicemail, he says, okay, well, what policy do I need to look up? He finds the policy based on the name, and the name of the policy is associated with the endpoint that we're connected to. In this case, it's going to be the exap.um.outlook.com. That call will be routed then through Federation into the cloud instead of to a on-prem unified messaging server. And of course, no diversion. So some of the stuff that we have to consider beyond unified messaging. Archiving. So in Skype for Business, we have two possible ways of doing archiving. We can either archive to a SQL server, or we can archive to an Exchange server. If you're managing on-prem archiving, maybe you don't want to manage two archive solutions. It's a common way to limit some of your archiving infrastructure. Server-side conversation history. So in the case of server-side conversation history, this is a new feature in Skype for Business that allows us to take mobility endpoints, for example, that don't have the capability of doing the Exchange auto-discover process because they can't read service records. Conversation history in Skype for Business is generally done through Exchange Web Services. So that auto-discover becomes very important for the client other or outside the context of the PIM integration. So a rich client, for example, is capable of doing that auto-discover, finding the auto-discover service for Exchange, going and reading through EWS the mailbox. Can't do that in a mobility client. So we have this feature now that gives the mobility users a way to get their conversation histories out of the Exchange server. It just does it from the back end. So the mobility client will now, and I'm going to look at the call flows here. There are some other PIM integration pieces that you have to be worried about here. So think about your out of office message that you set in your calendar, and you want to get that into Skype for Business so that other users see your OOF message. That's also done through EWS. Won't happen with a mobility client. Has to have a rich client logged in, go to EWS and read that out-of-office message, and push that into the Skype for Business database so that other users see that you're out of office, or what your calendar entry is. If you happen to have other calendar entries and meetings scheduled, that's how the information gets into Skype for Business, is via the rich client push-pull. I mean, they pull it out of the EWS and push it into the Skype for Business database. Happens about every 30 minutes. So if you set an out-of-office message in your Outlook calendar, either give your client about 30 minutes before you sign out, or sign off, sign back in again. It'll automatically get replicated into Skype for Business. Exchange archiving. This is an on-prem feature. So those of you that are still on-prem, congratulations, you can still do this. Data retention without SQL. You don't need SQL Server anymore to handle those archive solutions. It does require the OAuth certificate setup. The OAuth, by the way, is the feature that tells these two different systems that they trust each other for direct server-to-server communication. So Exchange trusts Skype for Business trusts Exchange in this case for direct front-end server to database connectivity. This data, by the way, archiving, is stored in the mailbox, but it's not accessible by end users. When you have archiving turned on and it's going to Exchange, it's an important consideration. This is not the same features that you see in PIM, which is like the conversation history. Conversation history is readable by the user. Archiving is a different animal altogether. That takes every message that you send, whether or not it can contact EWS, it still archives via Exchange. For a proper archiving solution, another concept to remember is this information is stored in a hidden folder in your mailbox. If you have not configured some kind of archiving within Exchange and you lose that user's mailbox, you haven't archived that information. So a couple of considerations here. It must be used in conjunction with Exchange archiving. You can't just archive to Exchange and expect it to be backed up for your proper retention policies. Server-side conversation history. I kind of went over this a little bit. It's about clients that cannot do auto-discover because they can't do service record lookups, DNS service record lookups. So it is a direct link between Skype for Business and Exchange. It's policy-driven, and it also requires OAuth. So I'm going to show you a little call flow here of what this would look like. So a mobility client, for things like meetings, he's the reverse proxy. I mean, this information would come into my Skype for Business reverse proxy, and that information would go directly to my Exchange. This is the same process that you would have in a rich client. For contacts, we go directly to the UCWA service. It does contact search lookups directly from UCWA. Now, that's the front-end server. That's a front-end server process to the back-end Exchange server. However, if you want to do server-side conversation history in this case, we're leveraging the Link LYSS service. Now, this is a endpoint within the Skype for Business system that allows me to connect to things like Exchange. So this information would then be pushed directly to the back end to Exchange and then back to the client. It does not leverage EWS at all. That's what my point was. So here are some command lines that you have to be familiar with if you're going to set up your OAuth configuration. I'll demonstrate these to you. I've got a little script to run. You'll see these. Get CS certificate, OAuth token issuer. There's a command line here that we can run in Skype for Business to look at the connections, the partner applications, and the second one listed here, the Get Partner application, is the one we would run in Exchange to make sure Exchange trusts Lync or Skype for Business. And there's also this test CS6 storage connectivity with the username. This will actually go out and verify that your storage connectivity via LYSS is functioning properly for the given user. I will demonstrate that as well. Personal Information Manager. Again, PIM uses MAPI and EWS. So if you have an Outlook profile configured with let's say you've got Skype for Business configured and you've got Outlook configured on the same machine, we'll leverage EWS and MAPI for connections to your mailbox. Some of the things that you might hit with the challenge here are if you have multiple profiles configured in your Windows profile for email, that primary profile has to be set to automatically log on, and it'll connect via MAPI. Otherwise, you're probably going to see things like this authentication pop up. So if you're logged on to Skype for Business on a client and you're also logged on to the same Windows profile with the same user account, authentication should be seamless. You shouldn't see another prompt, but we all know that we're logging into Skype for Business and email both at home on a non-domain joined machine. PIM has to authenticate you. So you log into Skype for Business, you'll see this additional login prompt. That's the login prompt for Exchange. Now, how many of us, just show of hands here, have had this problem where you see that prompt pop up and it just annoys your users? Okay, a lot of those. That's the reason behind that. Out of office message, we already talked about the process that takes place with out of office. It does require that the user contact EWS. So it takes the rich client to perform this function. The rich client, the Skype for Business client goes out to EWS and reads your out of office message, and then via the front end server, he communicates back to the front end server and pushes his calendar information. Anything he read out of the calendar, he pushes that back into Skype for Business. And of course, the calendar sync. It's not just the out of office message, it's anything within, I think, 3 months ahead that will put into your. So if your user's logged off in Skype for Business, other users can still see that you're in a meeting, if you will. They'll still see the proper presence information. So these are some of the things that they're outside the scope of unified messaging, but still involve Exchange integration. So I'm going to go over a demo here. I'm going to flip over a moment. Okay. So I've got this, my environment here. I'm actually going to catch a live trace here. So we'll kind of see how to troubleshoot this a voicemail problem for a user that has been migrated to, their mailbox has been migrated into O365, but they're an on-prem enterprise voice-enabled user. And I'm also going to demonstrate a call flow that takes a call into the subscriber access that's in the cloud and is able to route back to the subscriber access on-prem. Very valuable when you're in a hybrid solution. So you can see this user right here. I'm going to go ahead and run this. So I'm looking at the user here. Is showing the third-party voicemail policy. The hosted voicemail policy is not defined, and he is not enabled for hosted voicemail. It's set to false. For users that have not had this set, by the way, this will be a null value. It's always default to false unless you've turned it to true. So the process by which I'm going to go ahead and enable this user, I'm going to grant this hosted voicemail policy to the user using this command line, grant CS hosted. This is the one we went over earlier. So now I've told the system that, hey, this is a user that's enabled for the policy. Next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and enable the policy itself so these two properties work hand in hand. And at the end of this, we'll see that this user has now been turned into a hosted voicemail user. Now, a couple things that we talked about earlier is that this user should have been disabled for unified messaging prior to his migration to the cloud for his mailbox. And then you should have also gone in and configured a new dial plan in the cloud for this particular user. I'm going to go ahead and start. By the way, who's used or seen the CLS logging tool? Who's used CLS logging for Skype for Business or Link in this case here? Kind of a pain. Everything done from how do you configure these? A lot of syntax problems setting these up. This tool here should help you guys out a lot. I'm going to go ahead and start this. I've already pre-configured a scenario here, so I don't have to wait on this to replicate with SIP-Stack and S4 turned on. And I'm going to flip over here. And I'm going to call voicemail for this user. And you can't hear this, but if you look at the top of the screen here, you'll see he's calling. And you'll see a connection get established here, and then we're going to go ahead and hang up, or you're going to see an error. One of the two. Oh, you saw the forwarding call thing, right? You see it pop up there just momentarily? So he says, okay, this was a hosted voicemail. I'm going to go ahead and send it to voicemail. That's what you saw the forwarding call for. And then you see this failure. So in the troubleshooting session, if you guys went to that Skype for Business troubleshooting session yesterday, they talked about understanding the processes by which not to overthink the troubleshooting and jump right into the traces, for example. So based on what I've told you about the call flows, we know that the user was enabled for hosted voicemail. We could see that in this particular case that the call was forwarded and then failed. So this is probably not a problem. I mean, right away I can see, well, okay, it must be configured for a voicemail policy at some point. Where do I start troubleshooting? Understanding the concept. If I went and looked at the user account, I could see, okay, this user was enabled for this hosted voicemail policy. What's the policy endpoint? It's exap.um.outlook.com. So I know that that's a federated endpoint. Where do I go and establish tracing? I already kind of gave it away here. You saw me tracing on my front end server and on the edge server. This user is logging in from the edge server. So we should probably see some overlapping call flows of a call coming in from my client to this end user. And then on the front end server, we should see him fail to answer, timeout, and then roll over to voicemail. The evaluation has already been made saying that hopefully this user, we assume it has been evaluated and found to be in the cloud. So you should see an outbound invite. So that's where we're going to concentrate our tracing. I'm going to flip back over to my remote session here. We're going to go ahead and stop this tracing. I'm going to give this just a minute here to sync up, just to make sure it's able to write the files. Okay, we're going to get our logs. I just want the last 5-minute logs. This is that whole CLS thing, by the way. It's great having this tool for us to be able to automate all this. I don't have to type in the start time, end time, that sort of thing. I'm going to say OK. I've got my log file there written right to the C drive. And then I'm going to open this with Snooper. Now, a little trick on tracing. From experience, I know that I saw the voicemail redirection, or I saw a redirection. I'm assuming this is a voicemail redirection because the user didn't answer. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to filter on voicemail. Because I know that the invite that gets sent to the unified messaging server on-prem is going to say voicemail in it. So I see, look at that, an invite coming in, and it doesn't look like I captured all of my trace, but let's go ahead and find related. I just want that particular call. And here's, by the way, here's the call coming in to the user from my Skype. My user account, Lynn Rowe, is calling the Amy Alberts user. I'm just going to kind of scroll down here and look and see if I see anything of interest. Let's see, it terminated. Okay, call was canceled before it was answered. Look at that. What's that 480 here? It says the specified mailbox is not enabled for unified messaging. But I know that that user was indeed in the cloud because of the next link. Look at the source of this. I know that's my hosted voicemail. So I know that's where that failure came from, was definitely from that server. So that's really, I need to concentrate my troubleshooting on why does that system think that my user's not enabled for voicemail. Now, where do we do that? Is it going to be on my on-prem? We do this in the cloud control panel, right? So I'm going to go ahead and look at, let's go ahead and log into the control panel for Office 365, which I've actually previously authenticated. We'll make sure this is refreshed. And let's go ahead and take a look at this user. I can see that the user's been synced with the Active Directory via the DirSync tool. Oh, what's this error message I got here? Items that cannot be found. That might be where my problem is. So it says that I've got a license enabled, but I'm popping up this error. I want to go over here and look at my Exchange properties. Give it a moment, folks. I promise this will pop up. Now, the system here is actually trying to read the mailbox properties off of the user account. try this again. Exchange properties. Oh, what's that? So something's happened here for this particular user. I thought he was voicemail enabled, but there's something wrong with his mailbox. So this is probably what my problem is. I don't need to concentrate on my routing for Skype for Business. I've got a problem with this user's particular mailbox. Let's talk to my Exchange guys and find out why his mailbox is either corrupted or perhaps when the user's mailbox was moved, the batch for that particular mailbox failed. I know that to be the case here, just FYI. So this is something I would need to go troubleshoot now on the mailbox move. It's not a Skype for Business problem. Let's go ahead and look at the administrative tools for setting up a dial plan. I showed you the screenshots a while ago, but we're going to go actually look directly at the dial plan and walk through it. We'll go to Administer Exchange. We will look at Unified Messaging dial plans. And you can see the dial plan I've created here is the one that we're pointing to. I'll show you the properties on this dial plan just so you can make the connection. So here's the policy that we actually looked at earlier. And the dial plan. This is what we configured earlier. The routing for this, if I look at the contact that we're going to go look at in Skype for Business, this is the RTC special contact. Matching the telephone number that I was dialing. We also have an auto attendant configured for this particular policy. We'll go ahead and edit that. And you can see I've assigned this particular phone number to the auto attendant. Okay, I've actually got a key map enabled for this particular dial plan. So what I'm going to do is, if I go look at menu navigation here, I've configured this to, if the user presses 1, he's dialing a different phone number. This phone number happens to be the right phone number for my on-prem auto attendant. So this is going to give me the kind of opportunity for me to have users that are enabled in the cloud to have one subscriber access number that's different than the on-prem users. You can't expect a user to dial into a on-prem Exchange auto attendant and be able to get to users that are in the cloud. So you would want to transfer. You want to give those users an ability to transfer to maybe an auto attendant that's sitting in the cloud, or go the other way. In this case, that's what I've chosen to do. Kind of remember that phone number we have there, that 3000 phone number. Go ahead and close this down. And we will look over here at my enterprise Exchange solution. You can see the familiarity, by the way. I'm looking pretty much at the same screens, but one is an enterprise Exchange solution, one of them is a hybrid. Let's go look at the phone number here for this particular auto attendant. And there's that same phone number that I was doing the transfer to. So we want to see if this actually works. And by the way, did you notice that I was transferring to the phone number without the E164 prefix? That's because in Skype for Business, I've actually got a rule to add that plus in there. So calls that go out of the cloud that come back to your on-prem solution, they get treated just like an inbound call in to Skype for Business. They go through the inbound routing and outbound routing mechanisms in Skype for Business. So this phone number would be just like a PSTN call that just happened to originate from the online service that came through the federated connection that you have established to your hybrid configuration. So just to demonstrate this, we'll go ahead and call this phone number. I believe that is the phone number. And look there. It found, by the way, it found my contact object. It was able to pair up that contact object based on the phone number I typed in to the auto attendant that I created. This is the RTC special contact that I created. Let's go ahead and place a phone call. Now, you're not going to hear this, but you'll be able to see what happens on the screen. You'll kind of get an idea of what's actually occurring. Sorry, I guess I should have called that number. It's connecting. Now, if you were hearing this, you would hear the auto attendant asking me what to do. I'm going to go ahead, because I know I've got that key map set up, I'm going to go ahead and press 1, because I know that's what that key map does. I don't think I made it in time. I'm going to try one more time here. Press 1. Oop, I pressed it twice. That was my problem. But look, it transferred. It went ahead and transferred the call to my auto attendant on-prem. And you'll see it connect momentarily here, assuming my server that's on-prem is woken up. He's connected. Now I'm getting prompted here with the menu system from the on-prem auto attendant. So this is just kind of an example of what you would do in the event that you were trying to establish coexistence between your on-prem dial plans and your cloud dial plans. So this gives you the ability to link them together. Does anybody have any questions so far? By the way, I've got some shirts up here for those that love voicemail. Some of the things we talked about today. What is the process by which? I'm sorry. Go ahead with your question.
I have an architectural question. Is that okay?
Go ahead. Please carry on.
So the current configuration for voicemail with integration with Skype works really well for centralized deployments. When we look at branch offices and things like that, where we have SBAs, it doesn't have the resiliency that the survivable branch appliances have. Is there any kind of push to do some things in either the online version or the centralized version of Exchange to support that, or is there some change in the architecture that might help?
So the question is about the SBAs and how, if you have users registered to an SBA, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. So if they're registered to an SBA, can you get a resiliency or get any resiliency for dialing into unified messaging?
Right.
Now, I'll tell you, there's nothing's changed really between Link 2013 and Skype for Business. However, we do have a couple of features that enable PSTN rerouting of both voicemail and calls. So if those users happen to be sitting out and registered with an SBA and your unified messaging server happens to be somewhere else, they can indeed route through the PSTN, the local PSTN trunk, wherever that happens to be, through your SBA to get into your on-prem voicemail, and or they would connect via federation, right? That would go in, make a PSTN call into my home office, wherever the unified messaging server was, and therefore be able to route to the auto attendant that was associated either in the cloud or on-prem.
It's a long hop, but that makes sense. Okay. Just
Yeah.
wanted to see if there was going to be any sort of advancements in that, or if that was going to be the long-term vision.
At this point here, that's all I have for you. There's not been a lot of development done in this particular cycle of the product for the SBAs. SBAs are treated the same way they are in 2013 as they are in Skype for Business.
Okay, thank you.
All right, yeah, here, come on up for sure. Thanks. Awesome. Any other questions?
My question is about the SIP URI dial plan. You said that we need a SIP URI dial plan for link to federate with Exchange. Can it be a secondary dial plan?
So there is a feature, there is a command line only function that you can have secondary dial plans associated. Sorry, that's what the question was, is about secondary dial plans, and can you have the on-prem dial plan and another dial plan be associated as a secondary? And no, in that particular case, what you've got is you've got a Skype for Business user that's going to get evaluated with a single policy. So you can't be assigned like an on-prem dial plan.
It's only on-prem. So my scenario is that there's a Cisco dial plan and a Link dial plan.
Uh-huh.
So I'm trying to make Cisco dial plan as a primary dial plan and the Link dial plan as a secondary dial plan because I want the NWL map to be light up on the phones. But what's happening is that Link server is not recognizing it has a mailbox if I put the Link dial plan as a secondary dial plan.
So
Is there any adaptation in Skype for Business for that? Or
So you can assign a secondary dial plan, and in fact, if you've used the PowerShell command in Exchange to associate the link server as the secondary dial plan, then when this call comes in for that user to Skype for Business, he'll find that and he should route. You've got a configuration problem somewhere because that particular scenario does work. The one thing I would recommend in this particular case, though, is that, and I know you're doing this for MWI. So in the case of MWI, I mean, there's really no way. We don't send the MWI to the secondary dial plan, only the primary.
yeah, I just want voicemail on the all endpoints.
Yep.
I'm not worried about MWI.
So,
That I was able to get it working, but the voicemail is only being delivered to one endpoint. not the
okay.
second one.
That, I believe, you're probably looking at some kind of configuration problem because that is what our recommended solution is as on a migration scenario. We actually recommend that you enable Skype for Business as a primary because auto attendant routing and things like that come out of unified messaging, going back to a Skype for Business server, then you can manage all of those routing paths back to your PBX, for example, via Skype for Business. So that's the best way to do it. You run into some other scenarios with the numbers don't match up, for example, if you try to route back from the primary dial plan. If you'll talk to me, maybe I can help you find some solutions to what might be the configuration problem. But that scenario you described is perfectly fine. It does work. All right, here, let me get you a shirt. Any other questions? Oh, sorry. In the middle here, sir.
Could you give some examples of a dial plan that used a telephony type setting instead of a SIP?
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Did you hear that?
Yeah, I heard you. Go ahead. What about the dial plan?
Can you give some examples of a dial plan type that used a telephony type dial plan instead of a SIP?
Okay, so a dial plan in unified messaging, that's outside the scope of Skype for Business, of course, but you'd simply have your PBX pointing from a gateway, routing unanswered calls to its next hop being the unified messaging server. That's how that operation would work, and then of course you would configure the dial plan to be a telephony type dial plan, with basically the same properties you saw. You have to have the phone numbers, the extensions associated with the users, et cetera.
Are you saying that there may be some type of voicemail besides that could serve Link or Skype for Business?
I'm sorry, ask the question again?
Might there be other types of voicemail scenarios other than Exchange that can serve Link or Skype for Business? Is that what you were just saying?
No, but stay tuned. That's all I can say is stay tuned. There might be something coming in the future. Go ahead.
Kind of piggybacking off the same thing, completely off the topic of Skype for Business, but PBX system using Exchange for the voicemail platform. Can you elaborate? You hinted on it a little bit. Can you elaborate more on the call flow of how does my call flow work its way to Exchange Online? Is it separate SIP trunks from my SBC, or is it going to utilize the Exchange hybrid server? Not Skype for Business, the Avaya, like an Avaya system coming through SBC, in an Exchange hybrid scenario.
Uh-huh.
Where does the call turn the corner and go up to Exchange Online? SBC level, the hybrid server. How does that call flow work?
So
going
in the case of a straight telephony dial plan in the cloud, you can have that as well. Okay, you have to have an SBA in your environment that your PBX reroutes those phone numbers from the SBA, and the SBA is configured to connect directly to one of our cloud SBAs.
Right.
And then pick up that dial plan.
I understand that would be like on a full Exchange Online scenario, but in an Exchange hybrid scenario, am I sending it to my CAS rules on-prem first? They find the mailbox is in the cloud. Is my SBC going to take the redirect and then need to go up to Exchange Online? Or is there basically proxying through Exchange? That's what I'm trying to understand. Exchange hybrid scenario.
Okay, so in the scenario you described doesn't really involve any of the Exchange front end information, right? You don't connect to. Oh, I think I know what you're saying. No, you can't have like the call router.
Yeah.
Take the call and route that through your SBA. You'd have to have two separate phone numbers. Kind of the same thing we talked about here. You'd have a subscriber access phone number for cloud users and a subscriber access user for the on-prem. And then you can do the same kind of call routing you saw me do here. You call in one auto attendant and dialing into another auto attendant.
Okay.
That's the solution that you probably want. Come on up. All right. I appreciate you guys sticking around and coming in today. Just FYI, we do have a couple things I want to point out is that please go sign up for this SFB Insider program if you want access to more of the up-and-coming stuff. This is supplementary to what our TAP program is. So just remember that. If you're interested in seeing some of the stuff coming forward, and you want a preview of it, this is what you should do. Go join this Insider program. You'll get an opportunity to get feedback as to what we do with your feedback. We'll be able to circle back around with you and tell you what we're doing with that feedback. It is very valuable to us. We do hear it. We try to please as many people as we can with all of these various features. But yeah, please sign up for this. And also, there is an eval. If you guys don't mind, please go out and just tell us if you found this valuable. This is feedback, so the next time we have this session, we'll be able to tailor this to different technical levels. For example, just give us your feedback, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you. I hope you've enjoyed the show, and I hope to see you next year.